Hey, folks, you're listening to the Jobs Podcast. I'm your host, Tim Hendricks. Your time is valuable, so I hate to waste it. Let's get right to the interview. Today, we have Casey with us. Casey is an expert on cybersecurity as well as physical security. So, this is going to be a pretty interesting interview. Casey, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, man.
So, Casey, give us a little snapshot about where you were born, where you're from, your early kind of life and early influences, and we'll jump into your education after that.
Will do. You mentioned cybersecurity, and the connotation is immediately like, oh man, what a nerd. But it's a little more interesting than that for me.
Yeah.
So I was born here in Southwest Missouri, and I live back here now. I didn't live here for nearly a decade while I was in the service, but growing up a rural kid, you do everything, right? You do what you're told. So
Yeah.
that means you're doing farm work, you're helping on construction sites, building fence, all kinds of things. Matter of fact, my first real job was at the neighbor's dairy farm. So I was 13 or so, I think, and I wanted to buy a deer rifle. So
Yeah.
that's why I started working for the neighbor. That kind of jumped into, I took some weekend jobs at the local sale barn. I live in an agriculture community, so I hauled a lot of hay. Uh, um, then I joined the service, and that kind of set me on the trajectory that got me where I am now. Of all the things the Marine Corps could do to a guy, kind of turned me into a nerd.
It's usually the opposite, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, thank you for your service, by the way. I
Oh,
work with
thanks,
some
man.
Marines, and boy, they love to make fun of the other branches in the military. They have an edge, I think, to everybody.
Yeah, but nobody else can, right? It's like
Right.
we can make fun of each other,
Yes.
but you better not be just some regular Billy Bob out there making fun of the military because we're one team, one fight.
Yeah. The only thing coming out of my mouth when I sit at a breakfast table at the firehouse with a guy from the Air Force, well, they all pick on the Air Force, but the Army, the Navy, and the Marine Corps, I just sit back and keep my mouth shut, but I laugh because they're vicious, but it's usually pretty fun to observe.
Yeah, it gets pretty colorful.
Yeah. So you're in the Marine Corps. What did you start? Did you have your first taste of IT stuff or cybersecurity in the military?
Yeah, I did. So I went to MEPS and scored well on the ASVAB. The recruiter said I could pick my job. I had no clue what that means. Matter of fact, that's what I said to him. I was like, I don't even know what's available. And I just asked, well, what takes the highest score to get into? And he said, Intel. And I said, cool, sounds fun. Let's do that. Um, Having, obviously no knowledge of what that means or what the possibilities are, there are multiple disciplines when you look at the intelligence field, and I got a slot in what's called signals intelligence, and it's the short version is SIGINT, SIGINT. Everything in the military is an acronym, right? So I got into SIGINT, and my MOS school was 6 months long down in Florida, and that's where I got into tech, really. So I was studying all about radio frequency theory, wave propagation, antenna construction, how to use an oscilloscope. It's called an O-scope. So I can see the RF spectrum in digital form and find signals and decode them, find messages, etc. Over time, that developed into a cyber defense role, which takes it up a notch in the nerd realm. So about the first half of my enlistment, I was active duty for 8 years. So roughly the first half, I was a SIGINT guy. I went to Iraq twice doing tactical signals intelligence. And then in the latter half, I was in cyber defense at a strategic site, not deploying from there. So I could have volunteered, but the Marines kept all those slots full. So I had already been a couple times. We had a bunch of junior guys that were chomping at the bit to go. So I wasn't trying to get in front of them.
When you were in Iraq, were you the signals that you were dealing with were these communications on our side or the opposite side, the enemy side, IED signals, or all of the above?
The intent of my role was to gather foreign intelligence. So enemy signals, and that means a lot of things. There are still aspects of that part of my career that I can't talk about. Like once you've had a security clearance and been read in, take that oath. That's a lifetime commitment. So it was weird for a long time. I would come home and my wife would be like, "Well, how was work?" And I'm like, "Good."
Yeah.
And that's it. Like I can't talk about any of it. So,
Was
um,
that was that difficult for your wife to adjust to, where you couldn't really have that conversation that a lot of people have about their day and about, the office complaints and whatnot?
yes and no. So there's still all the regular old Marine Corps shenanigans going on,
Okay.
right? Plenty to talk about. But when it comes
Okay.
to like what I was doing as a profession, couldn't talk about any of that. Um, but it didn't really impact any ability to talk about. And we were young, man. We got married when we were 19.
Mm,
Um, Still married today, and easily will call that the crowning achievement of my life that we still
yeah.
like each other and are still married. Probably had a lot of reasons not to be, but um, when you move away as young people, 19, 20 years old, 21. Well, we were 21 when we moved to California. Um, and the people that I worked with, them and their wives, they just become our family. So
There is a bond that forms with people. Just, you'll meet perfect strangers that become there's that slice in your life where you went through something with them that nobody else could understand or experience. And there's a bond there that's just, it's probably close to unbreakable, isn't it?
100%. I like the way you put that, like a slice of life where there were people involved in my life that I'll never forget. I still talk to them. It's been 18, 17, 18 years ago, 20 years ago. Hell, I don't know. Yeah,
Yeah.
15 to 20 years.
Hmm.
And like I still have these guys' cell phone numbers and chit chat once in a while. So, yeah, it's
You
a
have those
lifetime.
friends. You have those friends where you don't talk to them for a long time, and then when you finally connect, you just pick up where you left off. It's like there wasn't that big gap in time. I've got a couple of friends like that, and that's a unique kind of friendship where you felt like you just talked to them last week, but it's been a year, 2, 3, or more.
Yeah, 100%. And today it's like, um, I'm thinking of a buddy of mine that I haven't talked to in a little while, but I saw on Facebook he got married. So it's
Hmm.
we see things going on in each other's lives, and then when you get a chance to catch up, it's like, man, you got married, you did this and that, and went
Yeah.
here, there. But it feels like you never missed a beat.
Hmm. So your training that you got in the military, how long does, let's say that you've gotten through boot camp, you're kind of getting into what your role is going to be in the Marine Corps. How long does that training typically take, and how would that translate into the non-military world to get that kind of training, or does it translate?
It does, but it takes work, and that's what I had to figure out. So
Okay.
my training was longer than most. So when I enlisted, I had to go in on my first contract 5 years active duty because of the length of my MOS school. Normally, it's 4 years because MOS schools aren't as long as that. But that job was pretty specific, and to be able to do the things I was doing that relate to my deployments and like the first half of my career, I almost exclusively would had to have gone to some other government agency when I got out or a law enforcement agency to be able to do the things that I knew how to do.
Okay.
The latter half of the career, so I went to another MOS school. So I had two MOSs when I was in. That one focused on the cyber defense things, much easier to translate to civilian employment. Even so, dude, I was active duty for 8 years. It took me a minute to figure out who the hell is this character that's not Sergeant Rash anymore,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Like that. And I didn't think it was a big deal at the time, but I've been out longer than I was in now. And I look back at those early years after getting out and I'm like, man, I had no clue who I was for a hot minute.
That I want to dive into what you just mentioned right there. For anybody that's listening that's transitioning from a chunk of their life in the military to then the private sector, what advice can you give to make that transition? Because you're coming from a structured, regimented, everything is just this way and we don't question authority and that's just kind of how it is and go here, here, here. And there are repercussions to the private sector, which is sometimes the exact opposite.
Yeah,
What's that transition like, and what advice can you give to somebody who's about to make it?
it it's different for everybody. In some ways, it was easier for me than others, and in some ways, it might have been a little harder. Um, it was easier in that I had learned things and had skills that did apply to civilian employment, and it has worked in my favor in that regard. What I the advice I would give is when a guy leaves the military, guy or gal, when a person leaves the military, what you're leaving is a fairly significant level of accountability. Anybody getting out needs to find that system for them. A small group of vets, right, is going to be the best place for them to land. Don't rely on the VA. I'm not trying to just talk trash about that, but they're not going to give you the support you need. You need accountability with people that kind of have similar experiences, right? That is the best thing, is to have one or two, maybe three close vet friends that it's like, hey, we're going to continue to meet at the gym for PT, or do something together every once in a while. Somebody to talk to about what's going on at work and how to deal with it in a non-military way. So that's probably the biggest piece of advice, is like you need a small group that is going to help hold you accountable.
Those small groups are going to provide you with some familiarity and consistency as you slowly kind of wean yourself off of the military and move into the private sector.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
And it's a lot of people will talk about, like, I don't know what my purpose is anymore, or
Mm,
don't know what direction to go, don't know who I am. I've been through all those things, but when you chase all of those threads to the root, it's accountability. So,
okay.
and when you get out, like, all accountability is gone unless you just have somebody that's going to do it with you.
What was your next step? You've made that transition. You've kind of stumbled around and figured out, okay, who is Casey? That was Marine Corps Casey. Now I'm private sector Casey. What is my next step in life?
Well, there was my wife and I, when we so I could have stayed where I was. I could have gone to defense contracting. I had options, but we wanted to move back to our where our roots are in Southwest Missouri. So that was a complete leap of faith to say I have no idea how to translate anything that I know how to do to an industry or market that has a presence in a predominantly rural area. Um, but we just did it. We wanted to be back close to family and living in the country, so that's what we did. We lived with her parents for 8 months while we sorted things out. Get Finding employment, like, I kind of knew some things that I wanted to lean towards, but it definitely got to a point where there is no such thing as highest bidder wins. It's just first bidder wins, right? Like, I gotta
Okay.
work, I gotta support my family, so
Yeah.
that was a little stressful at that time. And looking back, I didn't play any cards wrong, I guess. I just didn't know what cards I had. So getting it took me a good couple years to really figure out how to translate my experiences to civilian employment. The company basically builds software solutions for banks and credit unions, but I was a network security guy, so like firewalls, IPS, DDoS mitigation. When I got that interview through a personal contact in the area, and that company reached out to me and said, "Hey, so and so referred you. Go online and apply for this job opening." So while I'm on the phone, I just pull it up online, and I told the lady on the phone, I was like, "Hey, just so you know, like, I can't do any of that. Like, it's cool, it's interesting, it draws me in, but like, the way this job description reads, I'm probably not your guy." And she said, just apply. You'll interview with so and so. And when I went to that interview, we're this big nice facility, right? Just super very professional looking place. And we're walking into this conference room. And before we even sat down, the guy's name was Rich. I was like, Rich, look, man, if you need an engineer to hit the ground running, like, we can keep this pretty short. No big deal. And he was like, no, let's just talk. He ended up placing me on the network security team, and I was described to the team as a project. So, and I was fine with that. It's like, yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Set the bar low.
Mm-hmm. Only
Um,
way to go is up now.
yeah. So that's kind of how I got through. I was before that prospect came up. I'm talking a matter of a day or two. I was fixing to sign a contract with a poultry production facility that sold fertilized eggs to laying houses, and they were all contracted by Tyson
Hmm.
because Tyson has a big presence down here in the Ozarks.
Mm-hmm.
And they needed someone to be a manager over their artificial insemination operations. So they milk the toms to artificially inseminate the hens. They get higher viability that way. More eggs are actually fertilized when they lay them. So that's what I was gonna do, man. Like, and then it worked out with Jack Henry down here.
What do you think when the guy hired you and he said, Casey, welcome, Casey, this is our project? There had to be, I know that on the surface that may seem like, oh, great, I'm a project. But on the other hand, they saw something in you that they couldn't teach. And I think you can look at that as a compliment if somebody ever finds himself in that situation. You've got the stuff we can't teach. We can teach you how to do the job. That's the easy part. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, actually, and there's a lot of science behind that. Matter of fact, that's the way, you know, higher level operators in the military work, and it's probably the same a lot in firehouses and law enforcement. It's like, sure, you might not know everything now, but if you're trainable, we can work with trainable.
Yeah.
So you might not have all the best scores or the best resume, but we can teach you. And so I definitely took it as a compliment that I was a project. The team got a chuckle out of it. I was like, yeah, that's what I'm here for. Give you something to work on. So it was good.
Right on. So, what did you do in that job? Were you doing the same essential thing that you were doing in the military, or was it? Was it a more advanced version of what you're doing in the military, or was it something completely different, but in the
It was
same base?
completely different. It was
Okay.
completely different. So I had gained an understanding of TCP/IP and application protocols, digital network things that
Okay.
make computers talk to each other and to the internet. That I'm generalizing heavily there, but
Sure.
so I had a good understanding of the technology and how it all works, but I had never been responsible for configuring firewalls to make them route and permit and deny traffic according to what the business needs. So that was all new to me. They sent me to training, a course based on the technology that we use to kind of get up to speed, and then um, over a few years, projects got. I had less supervision over the things I was working on, right? So, kind of crawl, walk, run is the opportunity they gave me. It also helped at the time. The state, Missouri, was offering a program through some state veteran agency that the company hiring you, if they said your OJT period on the job training is 1 year, the state will reimburse you 6 months of that salary. So they basically got me for the first year at half price.
Nice.
Yeah. And I went and sniffed that out. I found that myself, and I took it with me to the interview. And I was like, "Hey, this is what the state's doing. It can
Oh,
save you
nice.
some money when you hire me."
Man, that's a ninja move right there. Very nice.
But that's what I'm talking about. It takes work.
You found an in, and that's brilliant. I absolutely commend you. You're 100% correct. You have to find ways to separate yourself, make yourself look attractive to your potential employer. So you've been
Yeah.
working for them for a while. Um, what was next after that, or how did you progress forward?
Southwest Missouri, you've heard numerous times in your life, oh, small world. Well, true, but when you live in a rural area with one big city, it gets pretty small pretty fast. So I had friends that worked at a local trucking company. A buddy of mine was like, hey, you do computer stuff. We're trying to hire somebody. Why don't you take a look at this? And so I looked at it, and it was basically what I was doing, but all different technology. And so after a few rounds of conversations, I moved over there because I kind of wanted to learn some new stuff. And I was with them for a couple of years. I helped them achieve big moves in getting their technology. It's very common when you have technology in your environment, when software revisions come out and you need to update and upgrade your devices, a lot of times that just doesn't happen. And that was the where they were with their firewall system. It was way behind on code updates. And so it's not as easy as just going in and clicking a button to update. When you got a fleet of firewalls that you configure through a management console, and these are business critical systems, so you have to hit change windows when they're least impactful to the business. So I just kind of took that under my wing and did that whole thing. It took me um, around a year to get all that done because if the current version is 9.6 and you're on 6.1, you can't just make the jump all the way. You have to read release notes and know like what versions do I have to hit along the way before I can get all the way. So it was a deal.
I didn't
And I
know
was kind
that.
of, yeah.
I thought you could
Um,
just jump to the newest one and it would cover all your bases. But yeah, if you've got to go through and pick and choose to make it, I can see that being a big undertaking.
yeah. So in my example of like 6.1 to 9.6, which is totally made up, you might have to hit like 6.5, 7.0, 7.1, 7.7, 8.0, so on and so forth. And you got to figure all that out, map it out, make a plan, make sure everything's copacetic with everything else in the business, plan the upgrades. So it takes a lot of work. So by the time I left, that was fully taken care of, and I had my hands involved in several other projects along the way. That that team at that trucking company was very lean, but everybody is super sharp. So that made it a lot easier.
What, to go down a bit of a rabbit hole, what types of training or certifications does someone need in order to even get their foot in the door in this line of work? Is there an industry standard as far as, well, you need this kind of certificate or this degree, either associates or whatever? How does someone even start if they're wanting to follow in your footsteps career wise, aside from going through the military?
That is such a good question. I like that question because I think there's a bit of a misnomer about the barrier of entry to get into cybersecurity. 9 ways to skin that cat, brother. Like if you if you know you're interested in a certain aspect of cybersecurity that involves a particular brand or type of equipment, I'll just use an example: Palo Alto firewalls.
Okay.
They offer their own certifications. You can get certified for that platform, and that platform is in use everywhere. Uh, most reputable, notable organizations leverage Palo Alto networks, either Palo or Cisco, maybe Fortinet or Checkpoint. Between those four next gen firewall systems, if you've got a cert on one of those platforms, you can get hired and be a firewall guy. And they're not just a firewall, but that's kind of how they're still referred to. If you're looking more for like to get into some leadership roles, you would want to look less specific to certain types of technology and more at like principles and procedures. Uh, there's a certification called CISSP that is um, highly regarded. CISSP actually means something because their attrition rate is still fairly decent for being an industry recognized certification. You can't just go take the test and pass it. You actually got to do some work.
Hmm.
Another one is like CISM, Certified Information Security Manager. Um, so, and none of that actually relates to a degree being an advantage. You can definitely go to college and study these things. Uh, but my observation has been over the last 8 to 10 years that a lot of times having a degree really doesn't matter. And to that end, like I got my degree before I got out of the service, finished it. I got out, had zero certifications, and then I start learning about like, okay, I'm going to be working on Cisco ASAs. It's a firewall. I don't know jack about that. I went to college, finished my degree. I don't know anything about these firewalls. So, all that to say, whatever specific interest piques your mind, whether it's firewalls, DDoS mitigation, identity and access management, data security, application security, all of these options. Maybe you're into pen testing, penetration testing, where you're trying to hack an organization. Like
Mm.
a lot of people do that as they're just a 1099 contractor for hire when an organization needs a penetration test. So, and there's plenty of training about that. It feels like I'm probably saying a lot and making it sound more complicated. The point I'm trying to make is there's 100 ways in, and you kind of just need to figure out where your interests lie.
These different certifications that you mentioned, the Palo Alto and the Cisco and whatnot, if I'm understanding you right, you can go direct to the company and get instruction on how to utilize their product right from the person who makes it. And how long does something like that typically? Is there a like 6 months, 8 months to get the certification or to become familiar enough with it to where you then could go and make money with that knowledge?
That's another really great question. So yes, you can just access that material. Um,
Okay.
somebody might have a book out there that you want to buy or something. Maybe Palo sells their own books. Um, when I got hired at that organization, they already had an account with Palo because they had their gear. So I could access the training online for free, and it comes with a caveat that says like don't attempt this certification unless you've been using the platform for like 2 years and you've been in security for 4 years. Well, I was brand new to the platform.
Yeah.
I took the training and passed the test all in like 3-4 weeks.
Wow.
So yeah, it sounds cool, but what I'm saying is like if you understand IP networks and applications, and then you go study a particular technology to see what its buttons and switches do, you can probably pass the test pretty easy.
Okay.
Um, Not that those Palo certs are a walk in the park. You got to read and study some stuff, but it shouldn't be seen as a significant barrier of entry.
Okay. I
And I
do
haven't even
think,
talked about like the vendor side. What if you want to go work for Palo? What if you want to work in a sales organization that sells Palo equipment, right? Like those are two totally separate avenues
mhm,
of getting into cyber.
you're you're right in that there is this. I have the impression, and I'm not a very tech savvy guy like you are, but I look at this stuff and I think, man, you have to do that for years and years in order to know how to, how to maneuver all these different avenues. I see, the IS people at my main line of work, and they'll log in remotely and fix something, and I'm like, good grief, how do you even know how to do that? And then it blows my mind. Like my printer's not working, and they'll go, well, okay, and then they log in, and in 3 minutes they've got it checked and it's printing, and I'm off to the races. So, there is a mystique. Like you really got to spend time learning that stuff. And I know you have to do the legwork to get it done, but it's probably not as substantial a time commitment as maybe a lot of folks think it is.
I think that last statement's definitely true. It seems like there's a lot of interest out there for people to get into cyber, but at the same time, it's like, I don't know if I can do that. And I'm here to tell you, like, yeah, you can. You can learn whatever you want to learn on YouTube now. The printer thing you're talking about, IT functions, information technology. I still have people ask me things like, "Well, you work in IT, right? Can you help me with my laptop?" Well, I mean, kinda, but
Yeah.
I'm just a laptop user like anybody else. Just because I
Hmm.
know cybersecurity stuff doesn't mean I can troubleshoot your laptop. So,
Right. Well, yeah, that's a whole different job under the umbrella of computers. Let's talk about the potential earnings in your line of work. And I know that sometimes that's a bit too broad of a question because there's always the context of if you live in California, if you live in New York versus Missouri, your income levels are going to be different, but so is the cost of living. But what types of is the sky the limit, or where is somebody going to start when they first get into the cybersecurity realm as a job?
man, I love it. I love the question. So, if you go to an enterprise organization and you want to be a technology operator, I'll just use my example, a firewall guy. You want to learn a certain type of equipment and all the functions and features and capabilities that it has. I think to some degree it does depend on where you live and stuff, but I've seen those salaries climb into the. I would be surprised to see any even an entry level below about 70. And I think that's also a message to people today, like, hey, if you're a Palo guy and you know Palo really well and you're making 65,000 a year, you might start shopping around, man. Like, opportunities are out there. And it really doesn't matter if you work remote or not. And it's
Okay.
not uncommon if you've been in an organization for a few years and you've shown your competency on the platform and you're getting more responsibilities and doing more. It's very easy to shoot up over 100 in pretty short manner.
That's pretty good for learning from these manufacturers and stuff, and the time commitment is there, but it's kind of like real estate. I mean, you can get a real estate license in a couple 3 weeks, but then you got to grind it out, you got to learn. But
Right.
then the sky's the limit. You can make some pretty good money in real estate if you're willing to work.
Yeah. And I will caveat my comments that I've made. I didn't know all of that when I started. They got me cheap because I was desperate to work. And I was probably in, the cybersecurity industry on the enterprise side for 6, 7 years before I realized the potentials that were out there. And I'll segue that into sales. If you work in sales, the potential for earnings are much higher because you're making commission. And sales guys are not expected to be the technical expert. They're expected to be the relationship expert. So, if you can carry good relationships with technology decision makers at enterprise organizations and understand technology enough to help them navigate, okay, well, if this is the problem you're facing and the use case you need to solve, these are the solutions we should be looking at. So let's grab this person and this person for that conversation and then, tee up some demos for you to look at. And next thing you know,
Mhm.
you're closing a $500,000 deal. I've never been a sales rep, but you close a $500,000 deal with a 10% commission.
It's
It's
pretty
like,
good.
yeah, and guys do that all the time.
Hmm.
So potentials are out there.
Do you
I
see a
I
lot of
haven't even I haven't even realized those potentials myself. Um, it's taken me crap. I was on the enterprise side for 8 years before I moved into sales, and I've been in sales 3 years, 3.5 years now, and I'm still in like learn mode. It still feels like some of the people I work with, I'm like, how are you so good at this? I'm not, at the same time, I'm not an account executive. I'm not a sales rep. I'm their technical resource. So I don't, I, I'll never have the earning potential that those guys have, but I like to stay in the technical know of things, staying abreast of the technology and the options that are out there across the landscape of security solutions. To me, that's kind of fun.
Well, what you just mentioned there, staying abreast of the technology, I would assume. your line of work, it's just constant advancement and movement and change and development. Is it I don't know if it's at a breakneck pace, but it just seems like every couple of months equipment that you just bought is bordering on obsolete anymore and we have to make changes and upgrades. Is it hard to keep up?
Sometimes, yeah, there are definitely. I'll use identity and access management is a discipline in cybersecurity that comes with all sorts of policy and procedure and types of solutions available. That's not really my forte, but when I have to know things about it, it's I've been doing these things long enough that it's I can go do some reading and research and be able to navigate these conversations with confidence, but still not be, the operator of that platform. So I don't really take it as it's not intimidating to me that I don't know everything, right? I have no ego about it. It is actually impossible to always know everything about everything that's changing in cybersecurity. It's
Hmm.
best effort and situation dictates. Depends on the clients I'm working with and the use cases we're dealing with and the type of technology I got to get up to speed on. So I'm always having to like learn and relearn.
Do you think that what you just mentioned right there, your ego, it doesn't take a hit when you don't know the answer? I can see that as being extremely advantageous in any kind of business where the goal is to move forward, not to stroke my ego.
Yeah, I mean, I'll take that all the way back to when I first interviewed with that guy that gave me the job and I told him before we even sat down, like, if you need an engineer to hit the ground running, I'm probably not your guy. That's the attitude I've kind of carried with me.
Mm,
I will not hesitate to say, I'm not the expert there. Here's what I know. Here's what I can figure out for you. But I'm definitely gonna have to find somebody um, that will be able to meet that need for you. I don't feel bad about that at all. I
mm.
learn what I can learn when the situation dictates. There's always somebody I'm working with that knows more than me about something. That's half the battle is knowing who to talk to. Matter of fact, I have even reached out to former colleagues that are just basically savants in a particular type of technology area. And when I learned that, I'm like, okay, uh, I don't actually have to really focus on that because I can always call that guy
Hmm.
and he'll know. You know what I mean?
It's
And I've
yeah.
changed organizations and then reached back and said, "Hey, dude, I'm here now and I'm working with this client and I got some questions." And you just follow through that way.
What would you say is your most favorite part, or what do you like the most about your job?
Oh, the people, dude. That's an easy one. Like I talk to so many different people, whether it's technology partners or other sales organizations we're working with, and not to mention our clients. There's never a dull moment in any of those. I get to meet and talk to so many people about so many interesting things. That's probably my favorite part.
The the downside to every job is there always is something that you dislike, and it could be something as mundane as a regular form you have to fill out, or a pretty significant part of your job that you grit your teeth and soldier on. But is there an aspect of your job that you wish, if I could remove anything from my day-to-day operations, it would be this?
So I'll when I was in enterprise security, any changes that I ever had to make on these network devices, especially in security, had to abide very strict change windows. And those were oftentimes middle of the night. And
Oh.
sometimes they had to be done on site. And so I would have to be at some location at 2 o'clock in the morning, uh, sitting there ready to like execute the change and have someone else on standby to help me monitor and make sure it was correct. Those change windows, early on in that part of in that slice of life, so to speak, I took a lot of pride in my ability and desire to take that stuff on. I was always like, "Yeah, I'll do it. I'll do it. I'll do it." Um, that got old. I was like, I don't really want to be this 2 a.m. guy forever. That kind of ended up leading into sales. I think in sales, every situation is so dynamic that it's really hard to put my finger on any one thing. But I'll tell you this, in my old age, I just turned 40. I'm I'm getting to be a homebody, man. Sometimes I don't want to travel, but it just is required.
Yeah.
Like sometimes you just have to. And I'm figuring out now, like, that's not my preference, but I'll do it, and I'll be happy to do it, and I'll make the best of it. But if I can avoid it, I try to.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. Is your line of work, I mean, can you put a percentage on how much you would have to travel in general?
If you are in sales,
Oh,
there is an
yeah.
expectation to travel some.
Hmm.
Now, it all depends on a person's position in life. I know guys that travel 300 days of the year, um, going to events, meeting with clients, um, all kinds of things for their job because they can right now.
Mhm.
And I've been upfront with that with my last couple of moves. Like, hey, I'm not strictly opposed to travel, but I can't be a road warrior.
Right.
And so I've been afforded the ability to, if my boss come to me and said, I really need you on this one, cool, man, I'll make it work. Or if it's like, do you think you can make it to this? I'll look at it. And if I want to, I'll try to make it work. But if it's like, man, there's just too much going on at home, I'm very fortunate to be able to work remote from home most of the time. Um, and having the ability to deny travel when I need to is really nice. But for instance, month of April next month, I'm basically traveling 50%. That's not normal for me.
Hmm.
It's usually about 20, maybe less is normal. Around 20% travel would be normal. And for me, I try to keep it as regional as possible, but that's not always possible, right? I work with sales reps in Dallas, Kansas City, Arkansas, Chicago. We have a guy in Florida now, so all that's on the table when the situation dictates. But I don't live under an expectation of being a road warrior. But if you want to, you certainly can.
Do you find that most of the folks that are successful in the sales role started on the tech side, or do you have those unicorns that are just selling machines and it's in their blood and they can read a couple of brochures and then just rock and roll, or how does that typically progress?
Both and either or. Like
Okay.
I do know a couple of guys that they know enough about technology now to be dangerous in conversations just because they've been around it enough, but they've never been, an IT guy or a security guy. They've been in sales their whole career.
Hmm.
Um, some guys, I think I'm probably in this category where I spent some time on the enterprise side and figured out I want to try something else. And that comes with value too, because with our clients, I can say, hey, I've been in those trenches. I know what it's like to navigate those change windows, and you just need those changes to work the first time you make it, right? Like, so that adds credibility, but it's not required.
Okay. What types of now the company that you're with now, you don't just do cybersecurity, you do the physical stuff as well, correct?
Yeah, that's been a whole new learning adventure for me. So we really, the company Secure Passage, we don't do cybersecurity like I have ever. We focus on physical security systems. So you're tempting me to nerd out a little bit because
Go
I've
ahead, man.
learned so much.
Lean into it.
Simple things like, a smoke detector isn't just a smoke detector anymore. They have these sensors, most often called an environmental sensor. It looks like a smoke detector, but it can do dozens of different types of detections, like monitor noise levels and can tell if, hey, there's elevated noise in this area. Sounds like people yelling. Well,
Hmm.
if that's in a school, it could just be an excited classroom.
Yeah.
If it's in a municipality building, it could be a disturbance.
Sure.
And these sensors can tell if someone yells help, help, if they scream help. They can pick up gunshots because that makes a certain decibel signature. Like they can detect smoke, they can tell if it's vape smoke, they can tell if it's THC, all kinds of stuff. And the same applies to surveillance systems. Like a security camera isn't just a camera anymore. They do dozens of different types of detections because of edge computing technology and AI. So cameras now they can see, is there a group of people assembling? Did that person that just walked by, were they carrying something? Did it look like a gun? License plate readers, face recognition. You see the point. Like, this technology that's been in place for decades has completely changed. What we're able to do is take all these logs, use them to create advanced indications and warnings of physical security issues. It's actually fascinating. So I don't
AI
know if I
is
answered your question or if I completely rabbit trailed on you.
no, that's totally. I love rabbit holes, man. It's interesting, and I don't know what I don't know. The AI just is changing everything when it comes to anything digital. AI is going to have an impact on it in some form or another, and I can see security. A camera just is not showing you what's going on; it's analyzing what's going on.
Yes, 100%. And all of that exists in data form, and we can extract that data and use it in AI models to create alerting and detections that otherwise was never achievable before.
What types of institutions? And I don't know if you're, I don't want to have you out any customers or anything like that, but what types of industry is utilizing this stuff? Is it government facilities, I would assume?
Yeah, we have two different in-house solutions. One of them is kind of a legacy solution that was born in the late 90s, got super popular in three-letter agencies right after 9/11, and that solution, we have state agency clients on that. And that's for, like, critical infrastructure and a lot of school systems, actually. We have an entire state that said, "Hey, we're using this platform for our entire public school system in the whole state." We have another state that said, "Hey, we're using this for all of our law enforcement agencies in the entire state." Um, so some of that exists. Now, the examples I gave you a minute ago is a newer solution. It was just born last year. Um, we have, when you're in sales, you got to do some work like, what is our ideal client demographic? Who are the buyers in this space? Like, who do we talk to? What type of companies are we looking for? Um, we really feel like, we're the tagline we're using is physical detection and response, PDR. We kind of just coined it. Um, there's an argument to be made that anybody that has security cameras and environmental sensors would strongly benefit from our solution. But right now we're looking at financial institutions. Um, Believe it or not, the cannabis industry is very
Yeah.
interested in our stuff right now.
Hmm.
Um, Gosh, I've
There's a lot of
we're
money in
talking
the
to
cannabis industry for sure.
yeah, yeah. Another one is retirement communities, like 55 plus communities. So the applications are so vast. I th- we haven't made a strong play for schools yet because we have a different solution for that. But schools have environmental sensors. Bathrooms in schools have vape detectors.
Yeah.
So, at any rate, long way of answering your question. There's a lot of industries that can/should be interested in what's going on in the physical security space. We are among the first movers in this type of technology. It's fairly new to the space. Nobody's doing with physical security data what we're doing. So my role right now at the company is a lot of evangelism, really, just talking to people about what's going on with technology and what we're doing to help. So
What type of person, and you've mentioned a couple of things in our conversation so far about having that teachable personality, being no ego when you walk in the door, kind of a thing. But are there certain soft skills that you see the successful people in your industry possessing that you would say, if you have these, you might want to consider this line of work because that's really going to lean into your strengths?
Yeah, absolutely. A big one for me, and this applies in a lot of things, is just critical thinking. So don't try to just check a box by what you have to say or a question you're trying to answer. Think critically about being insightful in the questions you ask and responding to the questions that have been asked of you. In sales, it makes a big difference if you're talking to a trucking company, do some research about trucking, like figure out some of the terminology they use. Look into the business. Do they do mostly refrigerated trucking? Do they do mostly flatbed? Do they do intermodal over rail? These are, and you can do that to any industry. So somebody that's going to do some homework and have some critical thinking ability. And next to that, just being a normal person, like just being able to have conversation. And matter of fact, I've told my kids this for years. This generation coming up into the workforce, they'll be golden if they can just have genuine conversations. You know, what is the phrase, like something of the oyster or whatever? The world is your
The
oyster. I don't know.
Yeah, the world is your oyster. Yeah.
I'm pulling a George Bush here. I'm going to butcher a colloquial, but you
Right.
know, if a person can just be able to be genuine and have good conversation, you'll do well in sales.
The sales, sometimes when people hear I'm in sales, they just immediately, what comes to mind is the sleazy used car salesman, slick and kind of gross. And I guess I have to deal with you. So this is sit down and would you like a water? And it's a chore. But I think you're onto something there where if someone can just come in and empathize with the situation that their customer is in and just treat them like a normal human being and turn off the I'm at 120, percent sales right now. Find out what your customer wants, find out what your customer needs, as opposed to just blasting them with verbiage and lingo and
Yeah.
flashy metaphors.
Yeah. Following a script is like the last thing you want to do
Yeah, right.
in sales. And you're right. It does come with that sleazy kind of connotation. And a matter of fact, that's kind of why I stayed away from sales as long as I did, because I never
Hmm.
thought I cared about it or that I wanted to be known as that in that type of role. But after, dipping my toes in and getting into some pre-sales work with when I got away from the enterprise side, I realized I like it. And when I come to the table with clients or prospects, it's like, yes, I have every confidence that our software can help you. But if the timing and budget isn't right now, cool. No sweat off my back. I at least want you to know what's going on in the technology space and how are these things advancing,
Hmm.
because you don't want to get left behind. If we can't make a move right now, cool. But let's not lose touch. Let's figure out, what are the steps to help you stay abreast of these changes and make your technology stack as useful as it can be to your security teams. So,
It makes you seem reasonable when you approach it with, I don't have to have a sale right now. I want to do what's right for you when it's right for you.
yeah, that's it, man. Like, look, here's the thing. I have a family. I have bills. I work, for a professional organization, aspiring to start my own business. I go through life just like anybody else does. So the last thing I want is somebody showing up and being like, "You got to buy this."
Yeah,
I don't want to talk to that person.
I
I want to
know.
talk to somebody that's going to be like, "Hey, we have this thing. It could probably really help. Let's figure out where you are and how to, build a roadmap to get you up to speed."
Yeah,
I'll have that conversation.
sure. Well, that seems like a normal person conversation that you don't need to take a shower afterwards.
Yeah.
what's your best advice for someone in your line of work when they make a mistake? And I know that when you're talking about cyber and physical security, a mistake can be a simple one or it can be a rather large one. And I'm thinking specifically about a data breach or something along those lines. How do you advise someone to respond when they make a mistake?
You know, I'm going to answer your question, but sh- real short story. When I was in seventh grade, I was working for my uncle. He was a roofing contractor. And we always got the OSHA speech. Hey, if somebody shows up asking questions, go hide. So, uh, seventh, eighth grade summers, I was roofing with him. And I messed something up one day. I used the wrong screws on these big sheets of insulation on a flat roof. And he said, "Who put them screws in there?" I said, "I did." And he said, "Those are the wrong ones. You got to pull them all out and put those other ones in there." And I said, "Okay." And he said, "Hey, don't worry about it. At least I know you're working."
Hmm.
So there's the encouragement. It's like, hey, if you're messing something up, at least everybody knows you're working.
Yeah.
And I have messed things up as an operator. I've taken down services, dropped entire locations from the network before. Like, I've done it. I've messed it up. Sometimes you can do everything right and it still doesn't go right because of something else you didn't know about. So I don't take those mistakes as a real detriment if you're learning from it. If you're making the same mistake multiple times, there's a problem.
Yeah.
Um, but in sales, it's like, what did I do one time? I called somebody out in an email for something, not in an abrasive way, but it was more of like a, well, so and so said this, so I was just waiting on that. Well, turned out I was in the wrong, and so what do? I just own it in the thread that everybody else was on, and I said, hey, that's on me. That was actually my fault. So sorry to you, person. Did not intend to do that, and you just move forward. Like, I may not be the best person to ask about mistakes because I don't dwell on that.
Well, no, what you just said right there, to sum up, I ask this question every single time. And I think sometimes folks that are listening may think I'm trying to give them advice on how to avoid to make a mistake or how to avoid making a mistake. That's not possible. You're
No,
always at some point going to make a mistake. We're human beings, we're flawed by nature, and that is what's going to happen. What separates the wheat from the chaff, so to speak, is how you respond to that mistake. And I'm seeing a trend with every interview that I do is the successful folks will say, you have to own that mistake. Don't sugarcoat it. Don't dance around it. Don't halfway own it. Step out there in front of everybody, acknowledge your mistake, and then do your best to learn from it and move on. You can't dwell in it, but you can't get past it until you own it.
100%. Totally agree with that. Jocko actually has a really good I think he actually has a TED talk about that. I don't know if you listen to Jocko.
No, no, I've listened to him a couple of times, but I didn't know he did a TED Talk. I'm probably going to look that one up.
Yeah, it's really good. There was a blue on blue incident. Fratricide is the term for that,
Okay.
and he ultimately took responsibility for it. And it's a really good story about just owning it.
I've got a coworker that anytime something bad happens, he'll just look at me and go, good. And then
That's a Jocko thing,
I
man.
know
That's a
he's a big Jocko fan, and I didn't know what he was doing at first. I'm like, what is wrong with you? This isn't good at all. And then he explained to me what it was, and I realized. So now I kind of chuckle whenever that happens. But
uh-huh. I got a buddy I do that with too.
yeah, that is a pretty good way to embrace. I heard one of my guys I interviewed a while back. He said, "Just hug the cactus, man. Just get it over with." And so
Yeah, in the Marines, it was embrace the suck.
yeah, definitely. So if you could go back and start over, so to speak, even though we don't like to live in the past, was there another career that you thought, I might want to do when you were younger, or did you always kind of think this was where you were going to be, or what? What do you think?
Dude, this was definitely nowhere near where I thought I would be.
Hmm.
Uh, man, I grew up in the country working on farms and construction, right? When I joined the military, I got into all this technical stuff. I always thought I would do something in conservation.
Oh,
I love to be outside. That's all I really care about. If it's in the woods or out in the fields, hunting, fishing, I can walk around here in the Ozarks and name just about everything that grows out of the ground and certain properties about it, still to this day.
hmm.
Um, and those are the things I really love. That's kind of where my heart of hearts lives, and is in essentially ecology and land management. If I get to a place where I can, I'm going to use air quotes here that you can't see, retire from the technology side of things, that's what I'll do. I'll just buy me a tractor with some implements and do some land work, helping
Yeah,
people with their forests and fields and food plots or whatever, gardens. I like planting gardens. I'll do that. you
yeah.
know, I just want to be outside, really.
I'm going to go down a rabbit hole that's totally unrelated, but one thing that I would love to have, and I have absolutely no reason for it other than I want it, are I saw some utility workers clearing some power lines, and they had one of those big drums on the front of a skid steer that will just carve through trees and things and mulch up the ground. Have you seen those?
Yeah, I actually have. I just recently priced renting one.
Yeah, because I could not afford to buy one. I can tell you that much. But
No.
they're pretty impressive, and I would love to make some trails on some property and just really, and then plant some stuff that you want along the sides and really make it a park-like
Yeah.
vibe. But
Yeah, that implement you're talking about, it's crazy awesome because you can chew through an area and the path that it leaves is basically mulch.
yeah, it's perfect.
It's the coolest thing ever.
Yeah. Yeah, I think if I could go back, even though I really like being in the fire service and doing podcasting, of course, if I could go back, I think I would get myself one of those and try and make a living doing that, because that would just be a blast every day to just go out in the
Yeah,
woods and drive that thing along. It'd be so cool.
man stuff.
I know. Yeah, I'll start a separate podcast about man stuff like that. That'd be cool.
Yeah.
Hey,
Do you
Casey.
do
Yeah.
the 9/11 memorial stair climb
No, I
there in
haven't.
Springfield?
No, I haven't. Mm-mm.
I've done that several times.
Have you?
Uh, Highly recommend.
Right on.
I I'm not a fireman, but I have a heart for service communities, and a buddy of mine was like, "Hey, man, you need to come with me and do this." And so I did. And for about 3 years running, after that, I took my whole family, and we all did it. Um,
Nice.
we didn't get to this last year, but it's a really cool local event.
I know I will never forget where I was on 9/11. Not to end the podcast on a depressing note, but I was in the firehouse at Copper Mountain, Colorado ski resort. That's where I got my foot in the door in the fire service. And somebody woke me up and said there was something going on. And I was about to get on a plane later that morning in Denver to fly out to California for a training class. And so then I had to go and scramble to get a rental car because, all the flights were canceled.
Yeah.
And then I drove all the way out to California for that class, and I listened to all the news coverage for, I don't know, 24 hours or whatever the time frame
Wow.
was. I drove straight through, but yeah, I'll never forget where I was on that one. It was rather unique to have my first year in the fire service be when 9/11 happened.
No kidding. That's wild.
Yeah. Well, hey, man, this was a really interesting interview, and I'm glad we talked because the cybersecurity stuff, it did have a bit of a mystique, and you commented on it when we talked beforehand as well as in the interview, that there's this myth out there that you have to have a master's degree and all this other stuff to get into it. And so anybody listening, take some of the notes about what Casey said in here and dig into it, because you could find yourself in a rewarding career and not have to sell your soul to get it. So
Totally agree.
thanks, man. I appreciate the time. I know you're busy, so I'll let you get back to work.
Well, thanks, man. I appreciate the time. This was fun. Hopefully, provide some value to your listeners.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Thanks, buddy.
Take care.
And that wraps up another episode of the Jobs Podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today. Hopefully you found that interesting. As always, I wait until the end of an interview to ask you to like, subscribe, and share. I feel it's important that I earn that support from you. Thanks again, and we will see you on the next one.